All right, folks, welcome back. It's day 6 of class, and we are going over Alexander Pope. So I kind of introduced Pope briefly last time, but this is the first real Pope class, and Alexander Pope is again, not a Pope. That's just his last name. I know when you read something old and you see the word Pope, you're like, it's probably the Pope. It's not a Pope. Alexander Pope. So we've got Alexander Pope to go over today. He's our third philosopher, and he is. Well, this is tricky. What he's advocating for is realism. It's about realism and about accuracy. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he does it all the time. A lot of artists will come up with an idea and they'll say this is really important. It doesn't mean they're necessarily going to do it. It's very common for people to come up with some rules and then not follow them at all. Although I'm going to talk about different ways of sort of following what Pope is talking about. All right, so let's take a look at Pope. Now, Pope is a poet, and so this is really the only piece of theory, I guess, philosophy that's in verse. Actually, that's not really, because Hamlet's a philosopher and his stuff's in verse. I don't know if you've noticed that, by the way. Hamlet, there's two different ways of talking in Hamlet. Sometimes Hamlet talks like a novel, where he speaks in like a big paragraph. But sometimes, and you can see that just from looking at it, it looks like a box. But then other times, when Hamlet speaks, there's this thing called Iambic Pentameter, which is 10 syllables in a rhythmic pattern. It's an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. So Hamlet will sometimes speak sentences that sound like alone, 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 alone. Next line. Sorry. Alone, 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 alone. Next line. So he does that. So Hamlet, and that's poetry. I mean, I know it doesn't rhyme, but poetry doesn't have to rhyme. But one of the things that makes poetry is this idea of starting a line break. Like, the words just, when you print it, you're going to want to respect the lines. You see Pope doing that here. This has that same kind of rhythmical structure. By her just standard, which is still the same, unerring nature still divinely bright, one clear, unchanged, and universal light, to be or not to be, right? It's got that rhythm to it. And again, it's which is made by having a line that has 10 syllables, and the first syllable is unstressed and the second one is stressed, and it repeats. It's complicated why Hamlet does that in Hamlet. It has something to do in Shakespeare often, but not always. Upper class characters speak in a kind of poetry, and lower class characters speak just like a novel, and upper class characters speak like a poem. But that's not always true, and you'll notice Hamlet is able to switch back and forth very easily. Although sometimes it depends on who he's talking to. So we can talk about that more later. It's not super important right now. Although I really like poetry. I like talking about poetry because I'm a nerd. I'm several kinds of nerds, and that is one of the kinds of nerds that I am. I am a superhero nerd, and I am a poetry nerd, and I'm a movie nerd, and yeah, okay. All right, so let's take a look at Alexander Pope. Our third philosopher. So Alexander Pope is going to use the word nature. And we talked about this with Sydney. It's always worth going over again because it comes up a lot. Which is the word nature means reality. Actually, if you took 201 with me, if you take other classes with me, it comes up in 201. Because when Macbeth kills the king, he says, they stab wounds which look like a breach in nature for ruin's wasteful entrance. And by breach in nature, he means the stab wounds remind him of a hole in reality through which evil comes pouring forth. That's actually one of my favorite Shakespeare lines in all of Shakespeare, and I've read a lot of Shakespeare. But I'm kind of rambling. Not rambling, I'm talking about poetry, I'm talking about Shakespeare, it's all connected. So the essay on criticism that Pope wrote here, and he calls it an essay, but it's shaped like a poem, which is fine. You can totally do that. He uses the word nature, and by nature he means reality. So the very first sentence I have for you here, and again, like everything I give you, this is much longer. I grabbed sort of the best 2 pages from each thinker to give you. And I could have made you buy a textbook or something, but the problem is you can tell I'm the kind of person that likes to focus very specifically on words, and I always feel bad making students buy a textbook, because then it's like, did we read the whole textbook? And why did I make you spend $60 on something if we only read 30 pages in it? So I'd rather just give you the 30 pages for free. Plus, things that are old that I like mean that they're free. So, yay. All right, so the first sentence of Pope here says, first follow nature. First follow nature. So the first thing you got to do if you got to be a great artist is you got to follow nature, meaning you have to copy reality. And he says that let reality be your guide in all things, in your decisions. He uses the word judgment, which means decision. Um, First follow nature, and your judgment frame by her just standard, just meaning like justice, correct, because and her is like Mother Nature, and she sets the standards. First follow nature, and your judgment frame by her just standard, which is still the same. Unerring nature. This means nature cannot make mistakes. Mother Nature is always sort of perfect. Unerring nature, still divinely bright. This is an interesting idea, and this is very different from Plato. Pope says that Mother Nature, or reality, is still divinely bright. Um, I think the phrase "divinely bright" is an important phrase, I think, for thinking about what Pope is doing, because divine, of course, means godly. Why does he say bright? If you know the Bible, in the beginning, that God created the light. That's like one of the first things God does. Let there be light, and there was light. Um, uh, and what he's saying here is that God made reality. And it still has that divine brightness, that the light was provided sort of by God for reality. I realize, by the way, some of my students, because I like old things and because things that are old in England and etc. Are very Bible trenched. Sometimes my students think I'm like a very intense religious person, but I'm not. The Bible's an important book that shaped the world that you live in today, and so I think it's interesting to think about. And it's also helpful if you want to understand what the hell these guys are talking about. You're going to need the Bible, not as a believer. I'm not trying to convert anybody or anything, but it just is like it's a force like Shakespeare, maybe even equal to Shakespeare. It's a force that really shaped a lot of the world. I'm sure someone's going to tell me the Bible's more influential than Shakespeare. It probably is, but no, I like Shakespeare. So he says, first, so the point is that for Pope, nature is still divinely bright. It's still nature, which is created by God, is still infused with sort of God's light and God's power and God's knowledge and this kind of stuff. First, follow nature. So you see, this is his advice to the artist. First, follow nature, and your judgment frame by her just standard. Right? Nature's got correct principles, which is still the same. Unerring nature. Unerring means can't make any mistakes. You may think about God here, who people say can't make mistakes. I would wonder if that's really right, but okay. Unerring nature, still divinely bright, one clear, unchanged, and universal light. Life, force, and beauty must to all impart at once the source and end and test of art. So you can feel the sort of religion infused in that, and the sort of Christianity that's in there, because the light of nature, an unerring nature, that Mother Nature, like God, cannot make mistakes. Everything that nature makes is perfect in some complicated way that it's hard to understand. I would wonder, is a tornado really beautiful and perfect and correct? And I would, because sometimes I would feel like there should be maybe less tornadoes, but I don't know. And someone will tell me that tornadoes are climate change and that's human intervention, so it's not made by God. I don't know. It's complicated. The point is that Pope sees nature, like God, as being this holy thing. It's one clear, you can see it sounds like he's talking about God. One clear, unchanged, and universal light, life, force, and beauty must to all impart. So nature gives two things: life, force, and beauty. It must to all impart at once the source and end and test of art. So Mother Nature, reality, is the source of art, meaning if you want to make art, it comes from reality. It's based on reality. It's a copy of reality. It's also the end of art, meaning it's the purpose. The whole purpose of art is to reflect reality back at itself. That we'll talk about this more, but that art is a reflection of reality, like a mirror. It bounces back to reality again. It's also the test of art. If you want to see if art is any good, you want to see, is it realistic? Meaning, does it copy reality? Is it accurate? Is it correct? Or is it just a bunch of nonsense? Okay, so I'm seeing this first little video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cool.